Okay. Malgo and Saqib, I'd love for you, we're quite a small group here, so I'd love for you to turn on your webcam if you are able and to unmute yourself and introduce yourself. And if not, that's okay.
It could be the witching hour for so many people right now. I'm
Yeah,
hoping that my children stay quiet.
true. It's true.
We can take a moment. Maybe some people will come in. Let me just do this. So I say maybe let's give people like 5 minutes and see what happens, Thiago.
Yeah.
Worst case, we all have an early dinner.
Yeah.
Thiago, where do you live?
I'm in Long Beach, just south of LA.
Such nice weather.
How about you both?
Get it.
I'm in New York in Westchester.
Cool.
I'm in New Jersey, like Central Jersey.
Okay, very cool.
We could actually do like you could actually learn a little bit about it. We can talk about it for a little bit, and then if people come in, they come in, and if they don't, we will we'll just see what comes out of it. So
yeah, I think some people also join expecting sort of like a radio show, like they're
let's have one.
Yeah, right.
I would love that. I want the gear and the headphones and the mic. I think one of my dreams would be to be on Z100, Elvis Duran in the Z Morning Zoo.
Totally.
Laura, I can see you doing that very well.
I love Elvis Duran. I listen almost every day, Laura.
I think that I would channel Danielle.
So how about let's just do like a 10-15 minutes, see if more people show up, and then plan to end early. And I think it's just interesting to chat about too. So and Tiago, so you can get a better sense of what's actually happening. So like the underlying recipe for what Schoolhouse is doing is just like small classes with great teachers, right? So Marie's here, she's a great teacher. Laura had 3 of these running in her home. So she can talk about what it was like. And what we sort of come to believe and have come to see is that the teacher's attention is really what matters, because each of the students have these unique gaps that are special to them. And sometimes they're like knowledge gaps, which is what people think most of when they come to school, like they don't know fractions. But a lot of times the thing that's blocking them is like a motivation gap or a behavioral gap or a communication gap. And that's where teacher attention matters, right? Because they can recognize it and then address it as it's needed. And so that's where great teachers come into, right? So the quality of that attention matters a lot, because if they don't recognize the gap, they can't fix it, and the student continues on with their issues. And so what we're trying to do right now is just create great schools in every community in the country. And a lot of that is finding great teachers like Marie and putting them out there so that they have their own schools and they have the ability to actually give the students the attention they need with these small classes. And so that's the simple recipe for Schoolhouse. That's where all the success comes from. that's what makes it work, is just that the small classes with great teachers, and we optimize for attention.
Yeah, that's a great starting point. And we'll also record this. We are recording this, and we'll send it to everyone who expressed interest, of which I think there were over 700. So there's a lot of people who are interested at some level, from, oh, what is this interesting thing, all the way to probably, wanting to actively start their own school. So let's just have a conversation about this, hear from Marie and Laura, and we'll send it out to everyone and see, and I think include some next steps that they can take. But yeah, is there anything else you wanted to say before we just hear what it's like from the teacher perspective and the parent perspective?
No, that was my setup.
Okay. Okay, who wants to go first? Let's start with Laura, actually. What was the inception of this crazy experiment?
The inception of this was the pandemic. I have been in education my adult career, and when the pandemic hit, friends joked that like, okay, Laura, now you get to start your own school. And so I did. I taught my children, and on probably day 5, my middle child wrote a letter to, because letter writing was part of our instruction, wrote a letter to her grandmother asking to be transferred out of my school. And it was like this aha moment, like I can do the teaching, because she wrote 2 pages, which is the thing that I had been pushing for. So in some ways I got everything I wanted. Here we are. I have my 2nd grader who can write 2 pages. but this is miserable. Like we're all miserable. And so in the spring, when sleepaway camps and all of that was canceled, I was like, okay, we're going to do academics. I can clearly do the teaching part of it, but I don't want to because it's not fun. It's not fun for me. It's not fun for my children. So I would love to find a teacher. Step in Brian, and Brian is like, Laura, we have this awesome teacher and we want to form pods and we want to form micro schools. And I was like, Brian, this teacher sounds amazing. He's mine. And I'm going to form a pod around him. And so I did. I formed a 5th grade pod, and then, couldn't leave my 3rd grader out of it. So I formed a 3rd grade pod also. All of that happened here at like Camp Laura. And then for my youngest one, who, I didn't push to the limit, I still ran his camp. So the summer started, we had 2 schoolhouse pods. We had 1 1st grade mommy camp. And it was awesome. No child resisted the idea of learning during the summer. And a lot of friends had said, like, how can we do this? How can we teach during the summer? I'm like, no, guys, it's going to be fine. This like amazing teacher for the 5th grader. And I know that Brian is going to find me an amazing teacher for the 3rd grader. And they had so much fun. And what was interesting to me was how quickly they accepted the idea that they were going to be learning over the summer. They still got to swim. We had epic games of like Newcomb dodgeball, but they were working, and they were working really hard. The math instruction, especially for my 5th grade pod, was rivaling a middle school math instruction. They loved the community. And that was a piece that I saw right away, is that they didn't miss for the chaos of a public school. They had friends who were different. It wasn't like everyone in their pod was the same people that they would have called their best friends. And so then fast forward, we continued the pods into the fall. Some of the teachers changed. We kept that like 1st, 5th grade teacher, and I hope and plan to keep him for the rest of my life. He's awesome. He has some of the students changed, but they have done the best science experiments, and they have had debates, and they have done writing, and they know about Mesopotamia, and I don't know about Mesopotamia, and they've learned vocabulary, and there's words all over the basement because they have a word wall, and they've done hands-on science experiments throughout the year. And so and they built a bench. We have a COVID community garden. And so the level of instruction and the connection that these students have, and the same goes for all of the other pods that we have going on. They are so much fun. In the 3rd grade pod, there was something they did with family trees. And one of the 3rd graders, not my daughter, in her family tree, she included her pod mates as part of her family. And so there was this like connection, and the reading, and they know the parts of the brain that I learned in my psychology class in college. And so they are going really deep in material. They're learning and nerding out, which is, what I want from it, but they are having so much fun. My youngest one this week, they did a science experiment and they made gummy bears. And so for a 1st grader, that's so cool that they made gummy bears. They're basically Jello, but he thought it was awesome. And then that was very inspiring to do all of this reading and writing, and everything has taken off. But I think what I see and hear over and over again is just how much fun this is. And on Saturdays and Sundays, yes, we have soccer and other things like that, but they're just like, but why isn't it pod day? And I'm like, guys, It's the weekend. Like, let's go for bagels. And they're like, oh, we miss our teacher. And so it continues to surprise me. And as someone who has a background in education, I don't feel like I'm always just looking for fun. I feel like I can be difficult to please. And this micro school model is, I love that you're laughing at me, Brian, is incredible. It's, a dream come true.
Wow.
No, it's awesome.
So cool.
That's the fun part of them, Tiago, is from what we've seen, and I think Marie can kind of talk about this a little bit, that you usually are able to get through the academics a lot faster if there are less students. And so that opens up this big part of the day now for the students to either do fun projects or explore their interest. That's the interesting thing, is that the length of the school day that we have now is really because that's what it takes to get 35 kids through the day. But when you only have 6, 8, 10, you can get through it really fast and then give them all this time back. And then they're being guided by an expert instructor on their interest. It's kind
That's
of, it's
so
kind of
neat.
a little, it's a kind of a little bit of magic sauce there. One of the things that Marie is she's an expert in reading and phonics instruction. And I think one of the interesting things for me about her pod was the students that benefited the most from like the pod model were actually like the gifted and the ones that were also struggling. And that was always interesting to me when I would hear her talk about it.
Yeah, Brian, you make some good points. I just want to piggyback off the previous thing you said. So as far as being able to get through so many more like deeper content and academics with having such a small group, like yesterday I was teaching geography. We're learning about the continents, the oceans, and then today we were studying the 50 states, and the students were practicing identifying the states. It's a typical third grade social studies skill. I have never had such an interesting time teaching geography to second graders because I only have a few students in my pod. So we were all talking about countries their parents have been, and I explained how the whole world is bigger outside of each continent, and then the countries, and then the state, and this is the town that we live in. And it was so interesting for them to really study the maps, and they were so fascinated by this world outside of what they know. And I feel like we were able to get into such a detailed conversation about it because it was such a small group of children, and they really grasp the content so much more. I believe that geography can sometimes be a little dry to teach. It's not the most interesting thing to little kids, but my girls were into it yesterday, and we were talking more about it today. And I've never enjoyed teaching social studies that much, to be honest. And then to continue on what Brian was saying about phonics. So I am trained in the Orton Gillingham multisensory reading program for kindergarten through 5th grade. So what that means is basically the program presents a hands-on, tactile, material kind of way of teaching the younger children in kindergartens through 2nd grade letter sound combinations, how they're spelled, how they're pronounced, and all of the different sounds that the English language can present. And then in 3rd through 5th grade, it presents word parts, meaning putting those letter combinations into bigger word parts, into bigger words to build their vocabulary, to really increase fluency and comprehension in children's reading. And just the methodology that's presented in the program, this is probably my 4th year teaching this program. And like Brian said, the progress I have seen in children using this program is phenomenal. And it's really even soared so much more this school year because I have such a small group. I had a child who was reading below grade level this year, and now she's reading above grade level. And I have a background in special education. I've always taught students with special needs. So to see that type of growth in one child, not only academically, but socially, emotionally, her confidence has just really, it's just soared through the roof, has been so rewarding as an educator. I feel like I've finally had the time and the space to really reach the children, which is why I went into teaching in the first place.
This is remarkable, you guys. I'm so amazed, and I have so many questions.
Go for it.
So I'm a new parent, 7 months into parenthood.
Congratulations.
And first of all, like I can't even, like, you guys are talking about like kids asking questions and having like ideas, and I can't even fathom like this little creature like doing those things. I'm sure that will come eventually, but I'm trying to put myself in the minds of a parent considering this. Like let's start with you, Laura. Let me think here. What was the biggest risk in your mind? Like what was the thing that you were like not sure about that was like the biggest leap?
For me, the biggest leap was the idea that we weren't going to be part of the bigger community.
Mm.
And we were going to isolate ourselves, which is so silly
Say more
looking
though.
back on it. Because, when this started, I would say our initial reason to join had to do with the pandemic. It was the push to try something new and to create something that is better. And what we found, if anything, is that we have a tighter community. And because I have 3 children and 3 pods, that's still a lot of people. And it's not like I ever showed up to drop off or pick up as a working mom anyway. I actually just feel like my community and my friendships have been deeper. I think that my children have different friends in their pods. So it's not like we have pods that are filled with everyone who likes the same sport, or everyone who's at the same reading level, or everyone who goes to the same, synagogue or club or whatever it is. We have different religions, different locations within our, 10-minute radius. And the diversity has been great. And the socialization has been wonderful. And so in school, they're not really socializing anyway. And so that was this big leap of faith of that's not really what happens in school. Families still make a lot of the play dates. And so my children have their friends, they have their play dates, and now they can write so much better, and they can debate, and they can think. For my 3rd grader, Marie, you were talking about geography. She did geography too. They played Oregon Trail, and they've been watching Carmen Sandiego, and they've been mimicking where Carmen travels throughout the world. And then they traveled to Indonesia. They had passports, and they had to look up the longitude and latitude, and they had to book their own travel. They watch Carmen Sandiego, and then they're doing character analysis about, what does it mean to be a good guy? Can good guys do bad things? Because Carmen is sort of like a Robin Hood. And then they tried this durian fruit, it tastes like a stinky onion.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there are all of these experiments and hands-on experiences that they're able to do that they never were able to do in public school. And the amount of feedback that they get from their teachers it's just different. If you mathematically break it down, how much feedback can a child in a public school classroom, who maybe doesn't have an IEP, so they're just regular or they're slightly above, mathematically speaking, what are they going to get from their teacher? And then take the mathematics and then take the reality of it. This is a child who doesn't misbehave. They really ended up with 2 minutes a week. And I loved their teachers. It wasn't anything against their teachers. It was just, here's what the mathematics dictated. If someone decided to act out of turn, or to not throw a bench, but act out, call out, that took up the teacher's time. And so there was no way to get that back. And so now that really doesn't happen, because even in my 3rd grader's pod, where we do have one of those children that would have been the time suck in a regular public school, that child doesn't need to act out that way, because she's getting what she needs and what she craves and what she wants. And so there's just more attention to go around. And so everyone is getting more than they would get in a typical public school. And so that's been incredible to see.
I feel like one thing that's happened with COVID is we all have fewer, better friends. And
We've learned how to drop some people also.
Yeah, it's like we had air cover. It was like, oh, exposure, have to minimize exposure. But I feel like one legacy of all this is going to be, it's much better, even for adults and children, all ages, to have fewer, better friends, more time and intimacy with fewer people, which comes right down to attention and time spent. Right. So it sounds like you were surprised that you didn't miss out as much on the school community as you thought. You basically created your own school community.
We're hearing that from a lot of the families. They're basically coming back, and I was on the phone with one of them the other day, and they feel now that they have another group of parents that they can rely on. So if they need somebody to watch the kid one day, they feel more comfortable reaching out now, right? They know each other now, maybe too well in some cases. One of the other interesting things that has come out of this model that I didn't expect, I never had an opinion about mixed age classrooms before. And now I think they're a massive benefit. And what I've learned from the teachers, and I had not even thought about this before, is that what it actually does is it creates a middle for people to go into. So if you have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, for instance, a 1st grader who's excelling can now start working with the 2nd and 3rd graders on things. And the 3rd grader who's having trouble can now work with the 2nd and 1st grader on things. And so now there's no longer this in age comparison of where do I stand with everybody else in the group. I'm just finding my place in the sequence of middles that are now created. And and so now there's no, like, you're not, the children won't take the failure of it, or like their potential sluggishness in a subject matter personally. They actually have a pathway out because they can work with this group until that group catches up. And that was one of the cooler things that I've seen that I did not expect and hadn't even thought about before, to be honest.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Okay, now I want to hear from Marie. My question, or did you have something to say first?
I was just going to follow up with what Brian said. I totally agree about the finding a new level of middle, as far as I totally don't see any of my students in my pod bored or, you know, waiting for the next thing or feeling that they can't catch up. I really feel like all of them have been able to find their groove, because with the small group I've been able to individualize instruction so well, and they've made so much progress that it's easy for them to go on to the next thing, and it's much easier to plan for like the challenges and the extensions because of the small knit group, and we don't have all of the other daily tasks that we're given in a traditional school. So
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. What I wanted to ask you, Marie, is kind of taking your perspective now. Like, you know, it's funny, I almost want to ask, like, what's in it for you? Like, where were you at in your life, in your career? Like, why was this attractive to you? It's almost like, as a parent, I'm like in risk mitigation mode. I'm like, who is this person who's going to be teaching my kids? Like, what had you kind of see this as an opportunity and take it?
that's a great question. A lot of parents have asked me that, and this actually brings up a story. Brian and Laura, I don't know if you know this story. So around this time last year, so I taught for 8 years. This is my 9th year. Last year, the 2019-2020 school year, I took off because I had a baby. So I took a whole year of maternity leave. So I was still employed with my public school. Original plan before a pandemic was to go back there in September. Pandemic happens. I have a new baby. I have a stepson at home who has asthma. So we're being very health conscious. Summer's coming. I'm hearing, you know, the plans of the public schools, and I'm really not comfortable with putting myself back into that situation, to not expose myself, but to expose my children. That's really, it was a big health risk for me. And then teaching in public school, I've loved it. I'm a teacher to my core. I never want to do anything else, but it can be very challenging, especially like I've said, teaching special needs, because there's so much tug and like give and take, and kind of a tug of war between what students really need and what resources and administration are able to give families in a public school with limited funding, with possible issues of, you know, litigation or things like that. So a lot of times,
Gotta love a Zoom pause, especially right in the middle of a story.
Mic drop.
There's always that moment where you wonder if it's just you or if it's everybody.
Yeah, you have to kind of look around like, oh.
She lives out in LA.
Marie, you froze and we lost you for like 30 seconds.
Sorry, what was the last thing you heard?
You were saying that special need, you like teaching special needs, but there's a difference between what you want to provide and what the school can provide.
Definitely. So I've often found that my hands are tied with different students that I've taught. So all of that being said, plus the health risks with the pandemic, I kind of started reframing what teaching looks like to me and what I want my career to look like moving forward. And I actually had a conversation with a good friend of mine who lives out in LA. Can we create our own school? Like, how could this happen? Right. So she was like, do you know families? Like, could we find a space to just get a group of kids and make our own school? So I started researching for that. And then I came across a posting from SchoolHouse, and I was like, that is the universe manifesting what I had in my head. Like, it was truly a miracle that it was amazing the way that it worked out. I literally could not believe that I saw what was in my head on the screen as a job opportunity. So I jumped on it. And now here I am almost a year later with the most rewarding school year that I've ever had. I feel like I've truly been able to reach every child on such an individual level, and I've seen so much progress, and I've developed such a close relationship with each student and their families. And that's why I went into teaching. And I can't imagine going back to what I was doing before because of what I've gotten out of this school year.
Wow, that's really remarkable. Brian, what you mentioned a couple of things that were surprising: the power of age diversity, the ability of people to form like community and get to know their other parents. Anything else that's really surprised you about this process?
I mean, just that it worked, just that it worked so well. I mean, there's actually like another piece. Like, there's all these little learnings that have come out of it. But in September, you know, I from the research would say, okay, you take a great teacher and you shrink the class size down, you're going to have better results. But on the other side of it was like, we're putting 50 teachers into people's basements, dining rooms, living rooms, some of them in like coffee shops that are closed down. Like, socially, what will happen? Like, are we just creating 50 like ticking time bombs? And the fact that not only did they work, but they worked better in almost every single case than what the school like before was doing. Like, that we're seeing dramatic increases in student outcomes academically. And that should be expected, right? Like, we're not playing a fair game. We have a great teacher and 6 kids versus, you know, a great teacher, maybe even 35 kids. It's a very different process. I think the thing that caught me off guard, outside of the mixed ages and things like that, was the social aspects that it kind of brought out of the group. It somehow plays into like these group bonding things. Like, I think these students really feel like this is their tribe. Like, this is my group. Like, without us doing anything, they all named their schools. And a lot of the schools created their own values. This is what it means to be a student in this school. And that was student generated, right? Like, that is a very interesting dynamic to take place. And I think the other thing that it really brought out to me is, especially in these age groups of like K to 5, how important the bonding with the teacher is. The teacher acts as the role model for their learning style, right? So if you have a teacher that really prioritizes reading, the students are going to start prioritizing reading. They're going to start enjoying it. Like, we have a lot of reading specialists, which is really fun for me. And a lot of them will say, when my students are reading, I get out a book too. And people don't understand why. And it's because a lot of this is mimetic. A lot of this is just copying. If they see me doing it, they see like, oh, the teacher that I respect spends a lot of time reading, I'm going to spend a lot of time reading too. It's those little things, right? Like, the little things that got lost along the way when we increase class sizes are just so powerful and so fascinating. It's these little nuances of how people learn that are coming out. So yeah, those are the pieces that are interesting to me. The social aspects that are fascinating.
It's so true. When I think back, there were just a handful of teachers that were everything to me. Like, I remember their names, you know, and there's these, you're right, there's these little moments, like Miss Williams, you know, in 4th grade, we would like practice 3rd grade or 4th grade, one of those, like our cursive. Back then we learned cursive. And if you went over, you know, on line paper, those faint red lines down the side, if you went one letter over, she made you do the whole page again. And I remember thinking, no one had ever held me to such a high standard in anything. And I was like, oh my gosh, details matter.
we want to offer that experience to every child every year, right? That's it. At the end of the day, like, a year ago we realized, okay, the teacher is the most important part. Will this model work? Oh wow, this model works really well. So now the goal is, can we put a great teacher in every community? Right? Can we give every student the ability to do that? And then the next step will be access. Like, how do we reduce the cost next to zero? But first, we got to put all these teachers out there.
Yeah, totally. Let's talk about the formation of a micro school. So, like, I'm curious, about speaking of, social dynamics, maybe Laura, you could speak to this. Like, how do you, that first phone call to another parent who's never heard of this, is happy with school, maybe, loves sending their kids away and not having them, in their home. I guess they're still sending them away, but like, what is the pitch, or what is the explanation to this parent of why they should have their kid join the school?
It started with a text, and then I think it is based on, everyone knows Laura has a lot to complain about. And so then if Laura's like, I have found the teacher of my dreams, come join me, I think that holds a lot of weight. And the idea that we tested it out over the summer, and there weren't really other alternatives. And, we had the Newcomb and the swim, like we had everything else that anyone was going to offer. So we rivaled any other camp for the experience. But then the idea that it worked, like everyone had the best summer of their lives. And since we were testing this, and I, was very nervous, like, oh, my name is attached to this, I made sure that everyone had the best summer of their lives, where I catered, events, and we, like, by catering, meaning like I cooked for everybody. And we had Thursday night, family dinner barbecue nights, and all of that was during COVID. So it was very unique, but people felt taken care of. And so then it was very easy to say, okay, now let's continue into the school year, because they felt taken care of. They saw how their child, who, I'm thinking of one specific child, had been labeled as like a high need child, not an IEP, or yes, IEP, but not struggling, but just here is a difficult child in school. And they saw how with the right environment, they weren't going to be labeled anymore. Everything was so much easier. Getting out of the door in the morning was so much easier. And then they got dropped off at, the grill casa, and, they were still taken care of. And so it was a level of, their teacher is taking care of them. It's not a hard lift to host it, but they were still being taken care of by this other grown-up in their lives. And we have a lost and found. And I felt, since by hosting, I get to make a few extra demands. For me, it was very important that they had communal meals. I rage against parents carrying their children's backpacks. And I think that the meals that, can only be certain brands is also something that is a problem, because I want our children to grow up and be tough and say, like, I'm at someone else's house, someone made something I don't want, and so I'm going to eat it or I'll starve. And we don't have anyone that's going to die if they don't like lunch. And so for me, it was really important that there were some communal elements to it. And so they had communal lunch. We all had like a Google Calendar, and we share who's going to do lunch and snack on what day. And it was a very big deal. And, it was interesting because I got what I wanted, where I had this shared meals. But then each child had this real sense of ownership of like, oh, my meal is next Wednesday. So I'm going to start talking to my mom and dad about what I want them to cook for this meal. And like, oh, here it was. And it was healthy. And, every now and then there's waffles or like breakfast for lunch, but it gave children much more ownership over their school day and much more ownership over their learning. I think from a parent perspective, I saw teachers listening to their children. What are they interested in? They're going to do the writing no matter what, but it doesn't really matter what story they're going to tell. And so teachers had the opportunity to say, my children are, in the case of my middle child, obsessed with Care Bears. So they have this banner that they painted, and they're the Care Bear pod. And in my older child, my fifth grader, he was really able to listen to like, what would be great debate topics? I know I want to have a debate. So, okay, two of the boys really love video games. So one of their debate topics was, should video games become a sport? And instead of using Scholastic News, they used the Week Junior. And so there was just this opportunity for the teachers to be a little bit more creative with the materials that they were using, and for the teachers to have more ownership. I mean, the durian fruit and they played Oregon Trail and the Carmen Sandiego, like that just wouldn't happen in a public school. And so seeing the creativity and then seeing how easy it is to get the children invested and excited in their learning, and the idea that they're all reading so much. We have never gone through as many books. And then the idea that the pod is less hours. Oh my goodness, it's less hours. So now we have, some would say, well, now you're stuck with them. I'm like, no, but now we can do tennis lessons, and now we can go on a bike ride, and now they can, jump more on the trampoline, or honestly, like just have a play date or some downtime before, they do their neighborhood sports. It's been great. And I think that the families love the idea that they feel so comfortable with the other pod parents, and they feel so comfortable at my house, which is also, my dream. But like, it's more than that. It really is this community of people that I can call if I have a problem. And for my children, for all of them, it's this whole band of people that have their back, and they can experiment and ask questions and get enough talking time that none of my children were going to get in a public school.
What other kinds of like customization is possible? I don't know. All three of you could speak to this, but like what variables are at play here? Like what things can you customize?
Almost all.
Oh, sorry. Well, one thing as a parent, I will say is that for math in their pod, they're all at different levels. And so they'll have a theme, and rather than them all completing the same worksheet, we already know where everybody is. And so they have a theme. Let's say they're working on integers. Different students are going to go differently with that. And so it's very easy to customize and say, I'm going to have 4 or 5 different activities going on, all within the same theme. And that is great, because I would say my oldest has never worked harder, and I love it. I'm always like, crush her more, like make it harder. And that's great for me as a parent.
So to your question about customizability, and I think this is sort of what Laura was talking about in her previous, the values of the family are taken into account, right? The child's interests are taken into account. The expertise of the teacher is to ensure the quality of the overall education while keeping those two things in mind. Mm-hmm. So it's a very participatory act on all parts, right? Laura's like, I want communal lunches because I believe that this is where they learn to do their social aspects. They learn to eat these things. That's important to her. To the children, I forget what the Care Bears as an interest are important. And so then it's the teacher's job to weave those things together, right? That's what's happening here. So the customization it's really, what are the limits of your creativity?
Marie, how about you? What are you able to customize as a teacher that wouldn't otherwise be possible?
So I like what Laura said about the different activities during math. So it's not even just about different activities. When students have differentiating needs, I feel like in a class of larger students, it's so much harder for a teacher to pinpoint when a certain child is having an issue. With this small group, I know their tells so much more and so much more thoroughly, and they know me. I'm able to pinpoint when they're in good moods or bad moods, and I can just look at a student and tell whether she's got it or if she's struggling. And I feel like that, just having that intuition with such a small group, allows me the room to really adjust my delivery in the moment. And I know when to push a child on. They're doing fine, they can go into the next thing. Okay, you come sit with me for a moment, let's review this, and we have a structured routine, we have a schedule, so it really flows smoothly. It's not we're held up doing one thing or the other. So that is a big thing, again, as a special education teacher, that's been important to me this year, being able to really hone in on each child's moods and address their needs in the moment when they need them. Because a lot of that is during the day. A lot of it is not pre-planned. A lot of it, depending on what type of mood they come in during the day, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is what they were saying about the Care Bear pod. My girls are obsessed with animals. The name of our pod is the Puppy Girl Power Pod. I have all girls, so we're like girl power, women strong, and we love puppies. So how can we put that all together? We just completed a social studies project about saving the elephant. So we studied about endangered species and what's the real problem going on here? What can we as civilians do to help? We wrote letters to Congress to approve the budget to save money for animal refuge sites, right? So, and that was a project they were so into because of their love for animals. So that, and again, being in this private homeschool setting and not having to follow, because so much of the teacher struggles, I think, in a traditional public school, because I am a strong teacher supporter. I don't want to bash public school or anything like that, but I think a huge limitation as a teacher with a large class in a public school, there's so many mandates, so many due dates to stick to, so much curriculum deadline that you have to meet. We don't have time to dive into this and do a fun lesson because we already are supposed to be on the next thing. We're already behind. So that freedom this year that I have to slow down and dive deeper into and spend an extra day doing an extension, creative, fun thing to bring the concept to life for the students. So it's not as boring, they're more engaged. That's been really amazing.
Wow. For anyone attending live, the live studio audience, if you have any questions that you'd like to have answered, please put those in the chat, and I'll be sure to get to those. But while we wait for any questions that people have, I want to talk numbers. I want to talk money. What does this look like? So I don't know how specific you can be, Brian. I'm sure it varies on different factors, but like for people, considering this, they think it might make sense for them. The benefits, I think, are abundantly clear. How do you think about the numbers? What does it compare to? Is there any leeway? Like, can you add or subtract certain features? Like, how would you think about that?
You can go with the light plan instead of the pro. Yeah, basically for the price of tutoring, you kind of get the whole school. So from what is normally looked at from like like we compare it against the private schools, which would probably be the closest comp, we're usually like a half, more in New York, like a fourth of their cost.
Wow.
And especially in the special needs categories, those are very expensive schools, and you can set up a pod with somebody like Marie at a much cheaper cost. It's going to depend on the area you're in. In some areas, it could be, like $1,000 a month. Some areas it could be 1,500. We usually see most schools are between like 8 and 16,000 a year, depending on where you are in the country. Right? In New York, it's going to be more expensive. In south of Pittsburgh, where I grew up, it'll be less, and because you're really just looking at the teacher's salary. And so how many people do we split that by and things like that? One of the things that we're also working on is giving the teachers sort of license and ability to say, I filled my pot out with what is needed to pay for it. I'm going to offer 2 extra seats to people who either get sort of financial aid or they just pay drastically less, so that we can actually, like, at a local level, give back. Right? We don't have the funding and the financing right now to do it at a large scale nationwide level. That's next. But we want the teachers to have the ability to say, here's who I want in my class. I think I can work with this student, and I have the bandwidth to do it, and we have the space. So that's usually how it would work. But I would say for most people, we want to be around, like 1,000 to 1,500 a month in terms of cost.
And when you said, I think you said around 16,000 for a year, is that 2 like 4.5, 5-month semesters? How long is a semester? I don't even know.
It would be about 10 months of instruction. So I think, like, you look at like 4 and then 6 usually, but like 4 and 5. It depends on the local area and the families, what they're looking for. So in terms of customization, like we're working with a group of families right now that want to do 3 months in 3 different cities. Right, it's a different thing for them, and so it's about the teacher and what they need and working that out. There's a lot of customization that happens, but yeah, usually you could expect to spend between like 10 or 15,000 a year.
And then summer school is a separate thing.
Yep, and those are set up by the families and the teacher. So they say, we want to do 2 days a week, we want to do 3 days a week, we want to do mornings, we want to do whatever. And they usually work out something together. And we sort of just act as the intermediary, right? Like, this gives every party somebody to go to if there's a problem, if there's a substitute that's needed, to make sure that insurance are done. What we really want to do though is make sure that this is like better for the teacher, right? At the end of the day, like, they're the people who we know are the biggest asset in the educational system, and they're not treated as such often. So we're trying to do everything we can to make sure that as the numbers in the schools go up for each teacher, that they're actually making a lot more money, that they're sort of uncapped at the top, right? If they build the next Montessori method, we want to help popularize that for them, and we want them to have a cut.
Wow.
So
what would a typical cost for summer school be?
that's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but I think I would say Laura might know, but like $2,000 to $3,000 is probably what I would imagine.
Per month?
No, I think it's like a 6-week program.
Wow. Laura, how did you think about the numbers? Like, I'm curious, what did you compare it to? What were the pros and cons? Like, what did you think through there?
For me, there were two things that I thought through. One, I received my summer sleepaway camp money back. And for those in the Northeast, it's very expensive. So this was so much cheaper than that. So everything was like, well, I have all this money, I get my sleepaway camp refund back. But the other part about it is, for the price of tutoring, and in elementary school, if you want anything to happen and to see any real gains, you need to employ a tutor for minimum 2 times a week. If you're doing one, you're wasting, everyone is wasting their time and their money. The parents are wasting their money, the teacher is wasting their time, and the teacher is not going to be able to show the gains that I know the teacher would be able to show. You just need more opportunities to have that time to connect. And so really this came down to, for the price of tutoring twice a week, I got a whole school. Like, that's crazy. So then talk about value. And private schools are so much money, and there's so much money, but then most students at private school, and you can fact check me, I don't know if this is a fact, but a lot of students at private schools still need tutors. So for where I live, if I were going to go to private school, I would be spending $50,000 plus tutoring, which here is like $100 to $150 an hour. Multiply that by 2, and then multiply all of that by 3 children. It's like, wow, that's a lot of money. And I'm going to be stuck doing that forever. And with my pod, nobody needs a tutor. Like, if you want to enrich and do the summer, you can, but the gains that were made, there's no need then for remediation, and no one needs to feel like they're lacking because they got it all in pod. So now I have all of this time, and I have all this money that I might have spent on tutoring. And so now we can do tennis or something else that makes me really happy. And for my children, it means that they have the afternoons free, that they're not going to be stuck with extra work or catching up. And so there's none of that anymore. And while I can be like a tough parent where I still want them to struggle in something, it doesn't need to be academics right now. And it doesn't need to be because their school isn't providing for them, or because their teacher, who is amazing and well-intentioned, just like couldn't get to it today. So all of those wishes don't happen because there is so much time, and they don't feel that like need to fidget because they have more recess, they have more time to play, they have more instruction, a better connection with their teacher. And for my children who are well behaved in a general setting, they would just let it go. Like, oh, my teacher couldn't get to me today, so maybe there's tomorrow, as opposed to demanding that time. And that doesn't happen anymore. So I'm saving money. I'm saving money in the long run. I'm saving money in the short run. And I just have happier children now. It's delightful.
Wow. Wow. Amazing.
It works
wow,
really
guys.
well. Yeah, it's really cool how well it works. I mean, the funny part of the whole thing is the education system as is could take us out of business right now if they just took the class sizes down to 10 or below and took off all the restrictive and prescriptive scheduling. Like there's no magic sauce. We literally just noticed that the teacher is what matters. Oh, it's the amount of teacher attention that people are getting. Shrink the class sizes down and give control back to the families and the professional who's a teacher, right? If your doctor was like, you know, had to follow mandates on everything he would do for you, he couldn't adjust to who you are. And that's all that we've done. And that was like, it was just the simplest of changes. And now we're seeing just incredible results. It's really fun.
Yes, I can tell you as a professional, like I've seen the growth in my owned instruction. Like I know the quality of my instruction that I've been able to give this year is so much better. Like the quality of instruction is just on a completely other level than I've ever been able to teach before because of all of the resources and the time that Schoolhouse, this type of pod setting has provided. I know that I'm a better teacher this year because of this type of setting.
Wow. What do people do if they want to take the next step? What is the next step?
Question. Give Laura a call. She'll set you up. No, getschoolhouse.com. GET Schoolhouse. You can come there and put information. You can reach out to me just personally. I like to get emails from people with questions. So Brian at getschoolhouse.com is a great way if you're interested. And it looks like somebody has a question here. But yeah, that's a great way to reach out. You know, if you're interested in setting something up like this or just have questions, shoot me an email. I'm always happy to answer them.
Yeah, we can close out. Actually, we have a few more minutes. Is it possible? So Sakib asks if it's possible for a pod to have multiple teachers, or do you always just have one teacher?
Yeah, normally there's one. What tends to happen once density forms, where there's like 3-5 pods in an area, is that the students might rotate between a couple of them. So if one teacher is stronger in reading and another is stronger in mathematics, they might divide up that way. But that is sort of a feature of density. And if you wanted to have a pod with multiple teachers, you could do it. It just makes all of the operations of it twice as hard, if not more, right? Because now you have two people that need to communicate. For these age ranges, one teacher usually works pretty well. And the value of doing that, I mean, you can, you know, it would work either way, but the real value I think is in the feedback cycle, right? Like a large portion of learning is trying something, getting feedback on how you did, right? That's how you improve. Without the feedback cycle, you don't know how to get better. And what this model does is it allows those to happen really fast because the teacher is constantly paying attention in a flexible way, right? The teacher can adjust because they know the student. And once they really get to know them, they can start to see the patterns, right? A lot of education, a lot of the learning that's happening these ages is just gap filling. You know, the student has a motivation gap, they have a behavioral gap, they have a reading gap. The person really should know, like you need one person to really pay attention to you to fill those. It's
almost like you're just trusting teachers.
We are. That was the whole point of the model.
Concept.
What a disruptive innovation.
Yeah, we were like, one of the things that we're realizing is the more we get out of the way, the better everything keeps working. And so like from a sales perspective, from like, we'll always say to the teachers is, what does the student in front of you need? Give them that. Like that's our philosophy.
Yeah, Sakib had a follow-up here, which kind of speaks to something I'm wondering. What age ranges does this work for? Or is there a different model or different approach you need like past a certain age?
So I have children, and so from experience, I have children in 1st grade, 3rd grade, and 5th grade. And in my area, we have a whole bunch of kindergarten pods. I would say it really depends on the teacher. I think it works so well for elementary school teachers because I think they were teaching everything anyway. And the one thing I love is that the curriculum is integrated. And so typically what I saw in a public school is they would be doing everything and they were parallel tracks. So math never connected to writing and it never connected to science. And everything is just about learning a story. So I think it works so easily for elementary school. And I think that if you find the right teacher who is a great writer, but then really knows their math and science, then it could work later on. And that, I think, is where you could have a team of teachers working as well, because as the math gets to, algebra 1, you might not have the English teacher who is passionate about Shakespeare and also passionate about algebra 1 and can teach a language. But I think that I sort of see, like, if my neighbor across the street had a pod, who has children that are similar ages, maybe 1 grade off, but we could share a science teacher and we could share a Spanish teacher, sort of thing. There's a few things that I see for later on that would matter to me as a parent, but I could see it working if more people said, this is a better model.
It's almost like you're creating a problem for yourself. If you advance the kids too fast, they need specialists sooner. Then you have a new problem to solve. That's the next company, Brian.
I have my hands full with this one. The thing about the age ranges is I think it works well for everyone. I think it works best in early elementary, because at that age, the connection with the teacher really matters, right? Like, these are personality forming years, right? And that connection with the teacher, especially in person, I think matters a lot. My suspicion would be that the older ages need less in-person attention, but they do need the attention. At the end of the day, everyone needs more attention from the teacher, right? I don't know where the diminishing returns on that are. I'm hoping one day we find it, but I know for sure that everybody needs more than what they're getting in most places. And I think that's what we're trying to do. Right? That's the valuable resource. Marie's attention to your child is the valuable resource, not the curriculum, not the special sauce, not the marketing. It's how much of her attention can you get? And that's what we're trying to scale up. We're trying to scale up the amount of attention that every student in the country gets.
Amazing. Well, we're at the end of the hour.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you guys so much.
Fun times.
This has been fantastic.
Let's just be 15 minutes.
We'll edit the recording and send out to everyone interested, and also share with you probably via my blog. And let's try to make the revolution happen. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome. Thank you for having
Laura
me.
and Marie, great to meet you. Thank you for being here.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.